Hello and welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911 podcast. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. And as you know, we talk to leaders and policymakers, activists who are innovating to improve the environment around the world. And this time we've got a story right here from the state of Washington. The Pollution Control Hearings Board recently ruled against improved protection against wastewater discharges by concentrated animal feeding operations, basically big cattle farms, hog farms, chicken farms. In the case of Washington State, it was a cattle farm issue. And we have Chris Wilke, who is with puget-sound-keepers and part of the Water Keepers Alliance, who was one of the plaintiffs in the case. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, tell us about, first, your organization. What are you about and what are you doing?
Well, Puget-Sound-Keeper is a citizens advocacy organization that's fighting for clean water throughout the Puget Sound Basin. We look at the area, we call it snow caps to white caps, so we go from the crest of the Cascades and the Olympic Mountains down to Puget Sound. It's our nation's second largest estuary. We have 28 river systems in the area, and we're working to improve water quality for the health of fish, the health of our communities, and everyone that relies on clean water.
So this ruling was a real disappointment from an ecological perspective. The State Board of Pollution Control Hearings, which is essentially a court, refused to improve the protections that you were asking for. What happened? What is the impact, and where we're going to see this actually impact people here in the state?
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a surprise. It is not unusual for courts to give deference to public agencies in a case of an appeal like this, where we were arguing that the protections were not strong enough to protect essential uses of our waters. Mm-hmm. It's not unusual to see some deference to agencies, but we do feel that the hearings board really erred in this case, and we think there are some serious questions in their legal opinions. So right now we're evaluating our options, but basically what this case gets to is the regulations from a water quality perspective of concentrated animal feeding operations. So these are large feedlots where animals are confined a significant part of the year, and they generate large amounts of waste. In particular, it's not exclusively to dairies, but in this part of the country, sure. Dairies are a major source of livestock produce, and the waste created by a single dairy cow can be up to 250 pounds per day. And this is stored in large lagoons, which for the most part don't have any sort of a synthetic liner. They call it a liner, but it's more of an earthen liner. And they've been shown to leak a very high frequency of the time. And we know that areas that have large amounts of dairies also have polluted groundwater, and they also have polluted rivers in the area. And we thought that a stronger CAFO permit was necessary to properly regulate that pollution and to put in protocols to minimize it so that we can start to recover our groundwater sources. We got whole communities that don't have access to safe drinking water through their conventional sources.
So nitrate is one of the things that is of most concern with this kind of groundwater contamination. What kind of health impacts do nitrates have on people?
Well, it is a special concern for young children, babies. It has been shown to cause what's known as blue baby syndrome. I'm sorry, I don't have the medical term on the tip of my tongue, but it is. Can cause severe health problems when too much nitrates in the system.
Mm-hmm. I understand from other stories that we've done that this can also cause reproductive, developmental, and problems of cancer. So it's serious stuff. Now, why would the Department of Ecology, the Washington State Department of Ecology, ask us to accept this. We've seen Flint has had water problems that were so severe. We know that after Florence in North Carolina, that some of the hog farm waste facilities were flooded and overflowed and polluted a lot of the region. And yet here, the state of Washington, which is supposedly very progressive, is saying, no, you can't, we're not going to protect you from this. And they seem to have been aware of it, right?
Yes, they were very aware of it. We had a very lengthy public involvement process to come up with this permit, and we submitted comments. We had over 4,000 people telling the Department of Ecology they needed to do a better job. And in this case, I think what ecology is up against is a very powerful industry that is supported by the Farm Bureau, the Dairy Federation, and others, and they are able to bring significant pressure on state agencies, and they've been able to secure a real minimum level of regulation from a water quality perspective. They have other regulations they have to deal with for health and other agricultural rules, but from a water quality perspective, for a point source, and this is these are defined as point sources under the Clean Water Act. They're about the most lenient permits that you can imagine, and they are not up to the level that you would expect from other point sources, which would be like a industrial stormwater or a sewage treatment plant or oil refinery or something like that.
Yeah, and in the state of Washington, we're also very familiar with this from the long-standing threat of Hanford's runoff, although the Stanford runoff is a problem too. Hanford's runoff of nuclear fissionable materials into the groundwater in the Columbia Basin. So you would think we'd be much better at this. What's the next step in this case, and where do you think this will end up?
Well, I honestly don't know. We're still reviewing the ruling. We're considering our options. If we would decide to appeal this further, we need to confer with the other appellants in this case. There was a group of 7 organizations that appealed the permit to begin with. So that's something that that conversation is yet to happen. But anytime you're entering an appeal, especially an appeal of an appeal, you have to look at the decision and what your prospects are for overturning it. So we're going to be going through that process. But, I keep coming back to the fact that our waterways are not protected from this pollution source, and there's a lot that can be done. And there's a problem that a lot of the dairies aren't even permitted. And strangely, that was one of the arguments that the Pollution Control Hearings Board ruled that was really puzzling. One of the things that we were seeking was groundwater monitoring immediately adjacent to where these manure lagoons are. That would tell us whether or not they are leaking and whether or not they're contaminating groundwater. And the Pollution Control Hearings Board ruling was very puzzling. They argued that because there were so few dairies that were even covered by this permit, that it's not clear that a stronger permit would prevent the pollution that they agreed was occurring. So it's kind of like not that many people are following the speed limit, so why would we put up signs or tickets? So that's a very puzzling ruling, and we think that we're still completing our analysis, but we think we may have strong grounds for appeal.
So a lot of folks listening will want to know how they can support not only this case, but clean water generally. What organizations, some of the other appellants were the Sierra Club and the Center for Food Safety, and of course the Waterkeepers Alliance that you're involved with. Who should they support? How can they get involved to help you improve our water safety? Well,
people can, across the country, they can find out who their local watershed group is. If you're in the state of Washington, the groups that were involved in this appeal, local groups were Friends of Toppenish Creek, CARE, Puget-Sound-Keeper, and resources for sustainable communities, which is also our North Sound Baykeeper. Those were the local groups that we were joined by Sierra Club, Center for Food Safety, and Waterkeeper Alliance. But across the country, people can find out who their local water protectors are, and you can find a way to get involved. You can donate. You can volunteer your time. You can come to the meetings. You can learn about what they're doing. And most importantly, I think lend your voice when there are statewide or even local processes playing out. You can let the agencies know that you care about clean water, and you expect our agencies to stand up and protect it. In this case, early on, the dairy industry was bringing a lot of pressure on the state, and we tried to counter that with public pressure, but evidently it wasn't quite enough. They were still feeling more pressure from the industry. So if those 4,000 comments had been 40,000 or 400,000, maybe it would have been enough to carry the day.
Well, let's see if we can get those numbers in the future. Chris, thank you very much for joining us on the show. I really appreciate it. And keep us apprised of what's going on.
Will do. Thank you for having me.
This is Innovation Interviews on Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and this is the Earth 911 podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, folks.